30 years of incubation, right there at 40. And my brother, his started showing up late 40s, early 50s. Sure. He had skin cancer. She had breast cancer. It's the big problem. It's the elephant in the living room that nobody's talking about.
You know what? I don't even know if they have a polio vaccine anymore. Do they even need it?
Well, would they have it if they didn't need it? Probably. They do have one. It recently switched back to this inactivated strategy, but they have better technology today than they had back then. And then there's the whole issue of vaccines in the first place, which is like another show in itself. But I even have an article from the New York Times which says they were withdrawing the polio vaccine, and this is back in the 60s, until a monkey virus could be removed from it. It's not on page one. It's buried back in the thing. So you see these little chunks of evidence, but what you don't see is the media asking serious questions about this.
There were a lot of people who knew about this contamination problem, and they didn't say anything.
That's right. But this operation with the radiation in New Orleans was more like a medical Manhattan Project. I mean, that was a very tightly controlled group. And what we find, it's set up in 1960. We find Sarah Stewart, who's the person that discovers the cancer-causing virus. She suddenly, weird career move, she suddenly transfers from the National Cancer Institute over to the U.S. Public Health Service, which would put her in a position to be administratively in charge of this facility, meaning that
they bought her off.
She had the power to quarantine the city if something went wrong.
Right. This could be one of the biggest scandal stories I've ever heard, Ed.
Well, I think it is. I can't imagine anything bigger. This affects the health and safety of everybody. And it's a story that's so bad, frankly, that a lot of people don't even want to go there.
And then even now, though, we hear about this situation with the H1N1 virus and the vaccine and the fact that, we've got hundreds of millions of doses on the shelf. They're going to expire. I said way before this was even a major story and a major issue that this is not going to be a pandemic. It's all a bunch of bull. And, I couldn't understand where with 15 cases worldwide, the World Health Organization was saying that this was going to be a pandemic. It just didn't look right to me.
That's right. And, George, it's the exact same tactics they used on the polio thing.
I was going to say,
fear.
They haven't changed at all. They haven't stopped doing what they're doing. They've used that old playbook of creating the fear and just going for it. And I don't trust them with these kinds of vaccines anymore.
No, and you're not alone in that. I can't tell you the people that I talk to that just won't go near them.
Man. So what do you do beyond the book? What do you do to help publicize that? I mean, you're doing this national show with me now. This needs to get heard. This story needs to get out there.
Well, the thing that I think will get the story out there more than anything else would be a movie. And, we're working on that. And, the problem is movies are really expensive, and you got to get some of the same people you'd like to be pointing the finger at are involved in the money thing. So you got to be careful about all that. But we have the screenplay. We have the producers. We're in the process of trying to do that. And I think that will put it into a medium that the American people will be able to digest and respond to, the same way that Oliver Stone's JFK brought the JFK story to life and got all those documents released.
I've always said on this program, Ed, that there are no coincidences. And when you look at the story of the Oswald connection here and Kennedy and everything else, this stuff just doesn't happen by chance.
Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction. I'm all for that.
And did you not write in some of the interviews that you had been working on that there are some videos on your website, drmary'smonkey.com, that some of them, like, for example, you talk about an interview with a Dr. Edward Shorter, right?
Right. Shorter's interviewing Maurice Hilleman, the head of vaccine development for Merck. And Hilleman is just saying, hey, all our monkeys were hopelessly cross-contaminated. And the problem with the cross-contamination is this, that monkey they use for the polio virus is an Asian monkey. But it was put in cages with African monkeys, which carry another disease called SIV, which is the simian immunodeficiency virus. That is the direct ancestor
to AIDS,
to HIV-1. So what we've got here is you got a test tube that's not only got this SV40 in it that you're trying to get to mutate, but it's going to wind up having SIV in it too. And when you start shooting subatomic particles near the speed of light through a test tube and start hitting DNA, I mean, it's like shooting a gun into a computer. You're going to change something. And
No, go ahead.
And so what happens is, and this is all happening 1960, 61, and when AIDS comes out, I'm talking about pretty mainstream things like Scientific American. They publish a book called The Science of AIDS. And all the epidemiologists looking at this, they run their mathematical regressions back, and they say case one is 1960. And the moment they say that, you get all these weird medical articles coming out saying, oh, 1959, 1959. And now you got this ridiculous thing about the chimpanzees in the jungles in the 30s and stuff, which I can which we'll do in the next half hour. But the point is that the possibility that these people inadvertently mangled SIV and turned it into HIV while they were trying to develop a vaccine to stop SV40 is very realistic, very plausible, and in my opinion, ought to be on the list of possible causes of AIDS.
How did it get out? How did it get out into the public? On purpose or accidental?
Well, I don't actually have the answer to that, but I promise you the people involved in this thing are capable of releasing it. Well, you know, the earliest cases we know of are Haiti. I mean, in terms of real cases where the scientists are able to go in there and with their PCR and say that is HIV-1. The oldest HIV-1 that they know of is 1976 in Haiti, and that's according to the Los Alamos database. So when you get these claims of, you know, HIV-1 in chimpanzees, you know, it helps to know that chimpanzee happened to be in a government laboratory in 1982, you know. So, and I got all the names on this. I think your readers, your listeners, excuse me, would be.
Well, they're also readers, believe me, heavy readers.
Would be very interested in hearing more about this chimpanzee link because it's, in my opinion, a total cover story.
All right, well, we'll talk about that when we come back, Ed, and we'll also go into some phone call modes. We'll take calls for the remaining part of this half hour and also next hour as well. Once again, where do you get the book?
Well, if you want to get it on the telephone tonight, there are people ready to handle your call, and we're packaging it with Me and Lee, because the same publisher that sells both, and Me and Lee is the story of Oswald and Judy. And that's at 1-800-556-2012. And on my website, which is drmarysmonkey.com, but spell out doctor, I've got a special coast-to-coast thing that's $5 off that puts it down under the Amazon price for tonight. And, of course, you can always get it at either Amazon or any local bookstore can order it because it's in the catalog. Well, Dr. Mary's Monkey.
It's a good read. We'll be back in a moment. We'll talk about this chimpanzee story and phone calls now for the rest of the night on Coast to Coast AM. On our next Coast to Coast program, we're going to be talking with the dead. I'm not kidding. Followed by open lines on Coast to Coast AM. And then when we come back now, we'll take an hour and a half of phone calls with the author of Dr. Mary's Monkey, Ed Haslam, on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Ed, let's talk about the chimpanzee story in depth here before we go to calls, if you would.
Yeah, sure. In the there have been various stories promoted over the years to try to put the origin of AIDS back in the 1950s. One was the Manchester semen story in Manchester, England, and they finally discovered the DNA of two people. in the sample, and that was discredited and officially withdrawn.